Serena Williams returned to Wimbledon expecting one thing: to prove that, even after years away from singles tennis, she could still compete on one of the biggest stages in the sport. Instead, her comeback ended almost as quickly as it began. And when Venus Williams later made comments about her sister's Wimbledon defeat, the conversation around Serena's loss took an unexpected turn. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one match. It became a story about Serena's comeback, the expectations surrounding her return, and whether people were judging one of the greatest players in tennis history by standards that may no longer be realistic. And eventually, Serena's coach, Rennae Stubbs, had something to say. The story began with Serena's long-awaited return to Wimbledon singles. After nearly 4 years away from singles competition, Serena stepped back onto the Wimbledon stage with enormous expectations surrounding her. She was no longer the dominant champion who had once controlled the tournament. She was returning as a 44-year-old tennis legend, facing a completely different generation of players. And that made her first-round match against Maya Joint one of the most closely watched matches of the tournament. Joint was young, hungry, and playing with nothing to lose. Serena, meanwhile, was carrying the weight of her entire career onto the court. Every serve was being watched. Every movement was being analyzed. And every mistake immediately raised the same question: could Serena really come back and compete at this level again? For a while, the match gave fans reasons to believe. Serena showed flashes of the player who had dominated women's tennis for decades. The power was still there. The experience was still there. And the competitive fire that had made her one of the greatest athletes of all time had clearly not disappeared. But Wimbledon doesn't care about reputation. And tennis doesn't reward a player's past achievements. At the end of the match, Maya Joint had done enough to defeat Serena in 3 sets. Serena's comeback was over. But the defeat itself wasn't necessarily the biggest story. The reaction to it was, because Serena Williams has reached a point in her career where every appearance comes with impossible expectations. If she wins, people celebrate the return of a legend. If she loses, the discussion immediately turns toward whether she should have returned at all. And that's where the controversy surrounding Venus Williams entered the picture. Venus, Serena's older sister and one of the greatest players in tennis history herself, became part of the conversation after comments surrounding Serena's Wimbledon defeat sparked debate among fans. The reaction was divided. Some people interpreted Venus' remarks as criticism of Serena's performance. Others viewed them as a more honest assessment of what happens when a player returns to elite competition after a long absence. But the discussion quickly became uncomfortable. Because when you're talking about Serena Williams, there is always a bigger question behind the result. Are people criticizing the match itself? Or are they criticizing the fact that Serena is no longer the player she once was? That distinction matters. Serena didn't lose to a player who had never been tested at the highest level. She lost while attempting one of the most difficult things in professional sport: returning to singles competition after years away and immediately competing against players who are younger, sharper, and active every week. And that's exactly why her coach, Rennae Stubbs, became involved in the conversation. Stubbs has been one of the people closest to Serena's comeback, and she understands better than most what it took for Serena to even step onto that Wimbledon court. From the outside, fans see the result: a win or a loss. But inside the team, the reality is completely different. They see the preparation. They see the physical demands. They see what happens when a player who has already achieved everything decides to put herself through the pressure of elite competition again. And after the criticism surrounding Serena's Wimbledon appearance, Stubbs pushed back against the narrative surrounding her player. The message was essentially clear: Serena's comeback shouldn't be reduced to one result. Because the decision to return was never going to be easy, and the expectations placed on her were never going to be normal. Serena wasn't returning as an unknown player trying to establish herself. She was returning as Serena Williams. That name alone changes everything. When a young player loses in the first round, it's a disappointing result. When Serena Williams loses at Wimbledon, it becomes a global conversation. That's the difference. And it also explains why Venus' comments created such a reaction. Venus knows Serena better than almost anyone. They grew up together. They trained together. They competed together. They experienced the pressure of professional tennis together. And for decades, they were not just sisters. They were two of the most important figures in the history of women's tennis. So when Venus speaks about Serena's tennis, people naturally listen differently. Her words carry more weight, but they can also create more controversy. Because fans don't always know whether they're hearing a sister's honest opinion, a former champion's technical assessment, or simply a personal observation. And that's where the latest situation became complicated. The conversation around Serena's Wimbledon defeat was no longer just about Maya Joint winning the match. It became a debate about Serena's place in modern tennis. Could she still compete with the best? Was the comeback worth it? And should fans judge her by the same standards they used when she was winning Grand Slam titles? Stubbs' response brought the focus back to one important reality. Serena had already done something incredibly difficult simply by returning. She didn't need to prove that she was still the same player she was at 25. Nobody can turn back time. The sport has changed. The players have changed. And Serena herself has changed. But that doesn't erase what she is capable of doing. The biggest mistake, according to those defending Serena, is treating a comeback as if it were a time machine. It isn't. A comeback doesn't mean returning to exactly where you left off. It means discovering what you can still do after everything has changed. And Serena's return was always going to be about more than winning another Wimbledon title. It was about stepping back onto the court and accepting the risk of losing. That's something many people forget. Serena could have stayed away. She could have protected her legacy. She could have allowed her career to be remembered only through her Grand Slam victories and historic achievements. Instead, she chose to compete again. And that decision exposed her to exactly what happened at Wimbledon. The possibility of losing, the possibility of criticism, and the possibility that every mistake would be discussed around the world. But perhaps the most interesting part of this entire story is what happened next. Serena's Wimbledon singles defeat was followed by another setback. An injury to her right knee eventually forced Serena and Venus to withdraw from the women's doubles competition. That meant the sisters' Wimbledon story ended without the dream finish many fans had hoped for. There would be no deep doubles run, no fairy tale ending, no chance for the Williams sisters to turn the tournament into another unforgettable chapter of their legendary partnership. And suddenly, the spotlight became even more intense. Serena had returned to singles. She had lost. Venus had become part of the conversation. And then the injury made everything even more complicated. But through all of it, the biggest message from Serena's team remained consistent. One match does not define Serena Williams. Not now. Not after everything she has accomplished. And certainly not after everything she has already given to tennis. The controversy surrounding Venus' comments may continue to generate debate. Fans will continue to argue about what she meant. They will continue to discuss whether her words were fair or whether Serena deserved more support after such a difficult comeback. But Rennae Stubbs' response has made one thing clear. Serena's team isn't interested in allowing her entire comeback to be judged by one defeat. Because the real story isn't that Serena Williams lost at Wimbledon. The real story is that, after years away from singles tennis, she was willing to come back and face the possibility of losing in front of the entire world. And that's exactly what happened. She lost. She was criticized. Her coach responded. Her sister's comments became part of the debate. And the comeback suddenly looked very different from the fairy tale many fans had imagined. But perhaps that is what makes Serena's return so compelling. For the first time in her career, the story isn't about whether she can dominate everyone standing across the net. It's about what happens when one of the greatest athletes in history decides to challenge herself one more time. And even if the result wasn't what Serena wanted, the conversation surrounding her comeback is far from over. Because Serena Williams may have lost her Wimbledon match, but she hasn't disappeared. And if this chapter has taught us anything, it's that counting Serena Williams out has never been a safe bet.